Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host, Hannah Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. Thank you for joining us on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim-focused network. You can always watch us 24/7 on Samsung Galaxy 19, Amazon Fire, Roku TV, and soon Apple TV. With the many struggles Rohingya Muslims are currently going through in Burma, one issue that we wanted to highlight today is that deserves more of our attention is the Karen struggle. So a lot of times people, when they think about Burma, they often, especially in the Muslim community, think about the Rohingya people. But many minorities in Burma are struggling. Tens and thousands of Karen people have faced impending genocide, torture, and gang rape. Hundreds and thousands of civilians are being displaced throughout the course of the conflict, many of whom who have fled to neighboring Thailand and are still currently confined to refugee camps. Joining us today is Myra Dahgaypaw. Myra, you'll have to help me correct the pronunciation of your name. I don't want to butcher it.
Dahgaypaw.
Dahgaypaw. Myra Dahgaypaw is a Karen human rights activist from Karen State. This is in the eastern side of Burma. She was an internally displaced person and a refugee prior to resettling in the United States. Since the age of 13, Myra has played a strong role in her community as an organizer and a human rights activist. Previously, Myra worked on a human rights advocate at the United Nations with the Burma Fund United Nations Office. Prior to taking on the managing director position at the US Campaign for Burma. Thank you so much today for joining us today, Myra.
Thank you for having me.
We wanted to first learn a little bit about your story. So you've been here in the United States since what age?
So I came here since 2004.
Okay.
As a result of running away for life.
And so were you born in Karen State? Where were you born, and where is your family from?
So I was born in Eastern Burma, Karen State, like you said, but I was born as an IDP. So basically, literally in a very remote area in Karen State jungle. And I've lived a life as an internally displaced person for at least 10 years before I came to the border area where it was bordering with Thailand and Burma. So, of course, being an internally displaced person is life wasn't, you cannot really predict what it is going to go on with the next day or next week or next month. Because at the time when I was a child, the situation in Karen State was very fragile. And the Burma army always came out looking for what they are doing in the Rakhine State right now, looking for civilians who might have connection with the Korean army. If that's so, then they capture, they kill, they torture, they use they use civilians as human shield, and of course rape and all those stuff. So every time when the Burma came into our village, we literally have to flee for like cats and dogs running out from the porch of the shed and literally running away without anything on our back. So that was the life I've lived. And sometimes I had to sleep in the rain when there was a tarp for each person. I still remember sleeping with part of my body was in the rain. And there were a lot of times when there was no food and I was the youngest. So I get to eat a lot of times, but those who are a bit older than me, my sister above me, a lot of times she was starved. So that was the first part of my life when I came about. And I've lived that life. My villages were burned down. The reason why I'm saying my villages is because I have lived in several different villages.
Okay.
So saying we fled from one village, and the Burma would came in and then burn down the whole village onto the ground so that we cannot come back and relieve. And on top of that, they planted landmines so that nobody can come back forever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we have to keep moving on from one village to another, to the point where we finally made it to the Selwyn River, which is the one of the main river in Burma, bordering Burma and Thailand. Only then things was a bit calmed down for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
but then of course the Burma army finally also came to the border and burned down our village. So yeah, that life never end. And
Can you tell me, just for our audience who might not know, what is the
mhm.
difference between mm, Bamas and Karen people? What are the main differences? And were you? Can you tell me a little bit of history about the Karen people?
Well, prior to colonization,
Mm-hmm.
every ethnic group in Burma, they have their own little territory where they have their own king, their own queen. For instance, even like Karen, they have their own independent territory where they have their own chiefs and all those stuff. And we have that for every other ethnic groups as well.
Okay.
Um, but then when during the Second World War, uh, the Karen were considered as the very faithful ally of the British,
Mm-hmm.
and which they were, and many other ethnic groups in Burma as well, including Kachin and all those people. Um, and then, so right by the end of the Second World War, the Karen was asking for independent state,
Mm-hmm.
and the ally, which was British, once promised that they will give the Karen the independent state. But then, when the war was over, the British, when the Karen went over to British to ask for their independent state, then the British said, "Well, you have to work it out with the Burman, the majority
Oh.
Burman."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Karen, with good faith, trying to work it out with the majority Burman, but apparently it didn't work out because the Burman um sort of they look at Karen as the British ally, and they don't trust the Karen. But at the same time, the Karen also cannot trust cannot trust Burman, because when Burman went to Japan and brought back Japanese, that's when the Karen minorities, the Karen ethnic group, have to suffer very brutally at the hands of the Japanese. And so, with all those complication that has happened between them, um, and then trust is very hard to build up. But at the same time, the Quran was still willing to negotiate and talk.
Mm.
And uh, they tried to work until the end, to the point where they figure, no, these Burmen are Burmen. Because when they started the they started the negotiation, talking with the Burmen, they could, back then they had very strong manpower in
Mhm.
terms of fighting, as well as very intelligent, smart people who have been working in the Burmese government, but now moving back to the current side, because they feel as though the autonomy, the freedom that they've been asking for haven't been heard, or have been neglected or ignored. And that is why now they come back and they work together. They could have maybe capture Rangoon, and then there could be something totally different these days, who knows. But because of their sincerity of wanting freedom and self-determination, but not wanting to take over everything,
Mhm.
and so rather negotiate and get good things out of it. But then back then, UNU was trying to persuade the Karen that, okay, let's work it out
Mm-hmm.
and then see how far we can go. But then when when UNU was trying to say, let's work it out secretly here,
Mm-hmm.
the the distress coming from here, secretly behind the scene, they're trying to work on their own forces, their own arrangement, how to get rid of the current population, current race. And this is not just the current population. They're trying to do this with every other ethnic group. And now closest to us, the Rohingya population. This is what they've been having doing forever. And
So,
so this is how the Korean Revolution come about.
how long has the revolution been taking place?
Since January 31st, 1949.
1949. So it's been several
Yes.
decades. And
Yes.
what has been the repercussions of? So can you tell me at this point, do the Karen people themselves consider them an autonomous part of Burma or a separate part of, how do the Karen people see themselves?
Well, it's a kind of hard to say. I mean, we do want to consider ourselves, uh, to a certain extent, the Korean people consider themselves as freedom fighters
Mm-hmm.
because we do fight for freedom. And for quite a while,
Mm-hmm.
we have settled at the Moy River bank, the Korean headquarters called Manaplo. And it was lasted for a good 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our own education, health, all, all kinds of departments that one would have in each country. We're trying to have as many departments as we can. We run our own little area, which we call Kotule,
Okay.
because current state is kind of like a little messy, where we the ones who joined the revolution lives in, we would call it Kotule, whereas other parts where you see the mixture of Burman and other ethnic groups, saying back in Delta, those we cannot consider the area as Kotule because we don't have the power to govern. So we had our own little area for quite a while, but then in in early 1995, that's when the Burma Army, with help from the Karen Buddhist Democratic Army, uh, captured the headquarters, and that's when I became a refugee, had to flee overnight into the Thai soil.
So you said the Karen Buddhist army. So that's separate from what religion do majority of the Karen follow?
Well, the Karen, originally, but then also later on, you have Christian missionaries came into the country and then converted a lot of Quran. But also at the same time, a lot of Quran who lives inside the. Okay, when I say inside, it means closer to the cities, the towns, going over to where the Burman majority lives, and also where the Buddhist monasteries and all those area.
Mm-hmm.
You also see a lot of Buddhists. So I would say maybe there's a good number, maybe at least 30 to 40% would be Buddhist, and then another 20, 30 maybe Christian, and then we have very minority. Animist is a minority now, and of course some small amount of Muslims. So, yeah.
Okay. And I mean, maybe our audience would be interested in knowing that the largest percentage of refugees that come to the United States are from Burma. And how many of that percentage
Yes,
are Karen?
I would say at least 80 to 85%. I would say.
And where are most of them settled?
they settle around the country. Right now, more and more locations are becoming bigger and bigger because of the secondary migration. So, for instance, if you go to right now Utica, upstate New York, Buffalo, those communities pretty big, as well as if you go to St. Paul, Minnesota, for instance, or in Texas, Houston, Texas, or some other big cities. So basically, they are located in pretty much, I would say, at least 45 states.
Mm.
Whereas some community will be bigger than others because some communities have been settled for longer time. For instance, like St. Paul, Minnesota has been there, I would say maybe at least 15 to 20 years almost. So, yeah.
That's interesting. So, and how active is the Karen community, civically engaged, and what is their goal, the advocacy goal here in the United States?
Um, I think there is two parts in terms of their civic engagement. Firstly, those who resettle in the U.S., I'd say maybe 40%, no, 60% of them came from very rural area, and a lot of them are illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
So they more focus on their day-to-day life,
Mm,
how to work, how to make a living and feed their family.
of course.
Whereas you also have another much smaller group where they get some education in the refugee camps, but
Mm,
then still there is a big issue with language barriers. So they may know how to do a lot of things. For instance, some of them have been medics, teachers, educators in the camp back in Thailand, refugee camps, or even back in Karen State, the Katuli control area. But because of the language ability, so when they get here, their language, their capability is not there. And therefore, they ended up working at the meat packing plant or some other low pay jobs.
mm,
But we also have very few who make their way to better jobs. Some of them work in the medical field, some of them work in education field. Very few of them, but thankfully we have the younger generation who now picking up, like every other immigrants and refugees, trying to pick up and make their way to a better place, higher place in the job world.
mm,
So basically, they have very little knowledge and understanding about advocacy. But
mm,
comparing from then and now they're becoming much better. We have a lot of communities who have communicated with their officials, whether from local level as well as state level. They already have those, and a lot of them already advocate for on health issues, local health and education issues, and especially social welfare, because those are the stuff that the community need most at this point. But also the good thing is that me working in DC at the national level,
mhm,
um, I can always count on them. That's a good thing. They're very supportive. And that is not just the Korean community. When I need any help with signing petition and all those stuff, I would email to call up every other ethnic group leaders, local leaders, and then they will be very supportive and helping me gather organizations or names and all those stuff. So basically, they do understand that there is advocacy, the purpose for advocacy. It's just that they don't understand it to the extent that we do and how to do it. And also, they don't have enough time to put in the time and effort. But
That's
when we needed their help, then they are very supportive. So that's
advocacy
another.
is a privilege too. It really is because it does. I have, there were pictures that came out from the Iowa caucus where Burmese groups over there had caucused with Bernie Sanders, and that was like a pivotal moment of seeing that inside a church.
Yes,
So
yes.
Yeah, so that was something. Now, considering the recent shift in the political climate in the United States and the ideologies of our current political administration, do you think the United States is still an integral part of building and maintaining democracy in Burma?
That's a very good question. I think it has so much to do with our leadership here.
Mhm.
I mean, if Donald Trump has the political will, he could enact the the bills that President Obama suspended.
Mhm.
For instance, like Freedom and Democracy Act, he can do that.
Mhm.
He can continue adding the perpetrators onto the targeted sanctions list, including Mionle himself. Um, in Congress, they have a lot of power to pass the bill, but the problem is we have Mitch McConnell sitting on the bills.
Okay.
And so if there's anything that has to do with Aung San Suu Kyi, then he wouldn't move anything. If that is the case, then it tells us that it is very worrisome because they are the people who have the power, but they are also the people who want to hold everything against the
And Myra, you've been working on this
the
cause
people who need their help.
for a really long time. Can you tell us more about this relationship that Senator Mitch McConnell has with Aung San Suu Kyi, which has put a hurdle into getting any, substantial work done on Burma by the U.S. government?
Well, I believe. I heard from him once. I don't remember exactly when and where was that,
Mm-hmm.
but Tasuchi is admirer of what's going on in the country as a whole. But because Aung San Suu Kyi was willing to give up her freedom and stand up for the people back in, started from 1987, 88 until to this point. So basically, he admired her, but he does not to my point of view, he doesn't admire the overall suffering of the people and the difference that people are trying to make collectively, whereas comparing to the late Senator McCain, he doesn't look at he admired Aung San Suu Kyi a whole lot, but at the same time he understood that the suffering of the people, the minorities, the majority, everyone's work in the country is a collective effort in order to bring about national reconciliation, national change of the country. So that is the difference between when one person look up to her
Mm.
as her um, admirer, whereas the other person look at the country as a whole. So if that is the case, then anything that would harm her reputation, he's not going to touch it. And
Mm.
that makes it very hard for us, the advocates, those who are doing the work here, to move him to do something, to do anything, because he's not going to do anything.
True. True. My other, let's go back to Karen State. There, some from Karen State have migrated or fled as refugees to Thailand.
Mhm.
So, how many refugees are at the Thai-Burmese border, and how do you think human rights organizations can protect these large groups of refugees?
Well, if you ask for the number, it's very hard to say because people keep coming in, and then another group resettle in the U.S. in other parts of the world, whether in Canada, Australia, or Europe. So the numbers, it's very hard to say how much the number could be. I would say maybe at least 200,000 to 300,000. But of course, there is also a number where they trying to go back to the Korean side to see if they can go back to their village and work on their farm and all those stuff. So we it's like the number is very fluctuated, so it's very hard to say total how many might be. But you also have the situation where there are people who would stay and trying to find their way in to see if they can maneuver through Thai system, and then they can live two lives. One side is in refugee camp, and another side is living inside Thailand as migrant workers. So basically, both sides living in as a migrant worker, they may be able to make some money, but then of course, life is not safe because they can be subjected to arrest and torture and all kinds of abuses anytime. Whereas living in the refugee camp, yes, if you are inside the refugee camp behind the wire, then you are somewhat safe. So
Mm,
that's different. Will the human rights organizations protect these people? No. Human rights organizations also are subjected to a lot of Thai laws.
mm,
A lot of them work, but also having to make sure that they don't cross the boundary. And
mm,
sometimes some of the work you have to cross the boundary. There's no way that you cannot cross the boundary. If that is the case, then the life is in danger. And that is why a lot of offices have to close down, either close down or work discreetly, not letting anybody know where their whereabouts. So I would say the human rights organization, unless the registered and also international human rights organizations or international NGOs, then they have different status. But the organization that I used to work for before, no, we're trying to do the best we can for the people and also making sure that we don't get arrested at the same time.
mm. So I know you have you have an appointment and you have to go. So I wanted to wrap this up by what are your, if you could have your way and things were going exactly according to your activism and goals for your advocacy, where do you think, what would you like to see happening in 2020 for Burma, especially for the Karen people?
Well, the most important thing is safety and security,
Mm,
uh, and the opportunity to have the basic rights that every other people have: the rights to education, rights to health, rights to live a normal life as a human beings.
mm,
And those are the most basic rights that we all are entitled to as human beings, but this is not the thing that we have.
mhm,
So if the government can consider the Karen population as well as every other ethnic groups as the people of Burma, there will be a big step.
mm,
Number two, if we are allowed to be the citizens of Burma, meaning that we are recognized with formally with identification, with some level of education, health, and all those stuff, if we can have access to everything that the Burman majority in Rangoon and Naypyidaw has, that's the very most important thing.
mm,
And if the Burma army come to the realization that, oh, all these people are human beings, why we have to keep go out and keep killing them instead of living in peace and harmony? So stop sending out their troops, take their troops back because we don't need them,
mhm,
and then clear out the landmines so that people can come in and come back in and work in their lands, because their security is very important. If the landmines are still there, if the Burma army is still there, there's no safety, and therefore there's no security,
mhm.
and there's no peace then.
That's so true. That is so true. Well, we're here with you in your struggle. This is one of the most beautiful part of this activism has been getting to know on an intimate level all these different people of Burma and this is, it's been really, really, I've learned so much from you. And this is something that we have to continue working on, because the genocidal regime that focused their attention on Rohingya in 2017 have continued to focus their same attention on the Karen people. The same military, it's the same regime, and their hate does not stop. And this is something that we just have to, liberation is tied together. And until, if you're getting rid of that military stronghold over that beautiful country, would make so many people, live peaceful lives. So,
Indeed, that's very true. And I wanted to leave our audience with one last point: is that Burma, the Burman majority, which is in the power ever since the Burma got independent, they've been ruling Burma with the system, the tactic of divide and rule. Why is that? Some people may ask. They're trying to put us in our own little box so that we don't know what's going on in the western side of the country or the northern side of the country. Giving you from my own example, I didn't learn about Rohingya population until 2007 when I did advocacy at the UN. All of a sudden, I read about the boat people, and I was just like, "Oh my goodness! Here is another group from Burma, and I never know about them." Because when I live in the refugee camp, we have some Muslim people, but very few, of course, just 2-3 families. So now I found another big group, and I was just like, seriously? Are they the people of Burma? And then I started Googling, I started reading. So this is just to give you a little gist of how they use the divide and rule policy so that we don't know each other. And that is why when they fight us, we think they fight us alone. But apparently, no, they don't fight us alone. They fight everybody in the country. But if they fight everyone at once, they were not going to be able to win. And that is why they have to go piece by piece by piece by piece.
that is so profound. That is so profound. Thank you so much for being here, Myra. And we'd love to have you back on. This was an introduction to the Quran struggle, and we want to really dig deep into it and educate our audience. So we'll have you back on.
Great.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us. You can continue watching us on Muslim Network TV, on Galaxy 19, Amazon Fire, and Roku TV. Assalamu alaikum.